feeds so that they don't keep shutting us down. That's what we got to do. We gotta fight the moles. We gotta cut these damn agents' heads off, man. That's what we about. So with that being said, may the divine force in me greet the divine force in you. Do-ah, 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 family. Peace. Ashe.
From, well, that comes from penis. Everything's all male oriented. Penalty comes from that. Punishment. I just want you to get, you know, kind of an overview of what the Old Testament's really about. And of course, penitentiary. And anyone who goes there knows what happens to them there. Doesn't have much to do with women. So penitent comes from that word. Now, woman who has been relegated, that word comes from this. A womb man. A man with a womb. That's where woman comes from. So they're not really secondary, but they're made out to be. And of course, the Amen on the end of the hymns comes from Amun-Ra, who is also called the Hidden One. He was really Marduk, and he ruled over Egypt. And these people that came here were ruled by somebody called Anu, and they were called the Anunnaki. Now that meant, Ki means the earth. Ki is the Sumerian word for the earth. Ki means something that's being cut. And that's where we get Gaia, geography, geology, comes from the Sumerian word ki, to cut. Oh, this chalk is hideous, isn't it? Anyway, this is the meaning of what goes on in there. Now, Easter, in ancient Egypt, everyone gave everyone else colored eggs at Easter. We're talking 8,000 years ago here. Easter. And in Europe, Easter comes from the goddess Estra. Well, estrogen, ovum, it means eggs. It's all in, you've got the article there, that's in the paper, so we don't have to go into that. Then, what next should we? Now, the Tower of Babel, of course, Babel has nothing to do with language or babbling or anything like that. Babeli is a Sumerian word meaning gateway of the gods. That's what it was. It was a launch pad like Cape Kennedy. Why don't we believe that other people could do the things we are now doing? We've been to the moon. We're up in space. We've got all kinds of satellites up there. We're drowning everyone in chemicals. We're dabbling. We've got a big genetic business. And they don't want to realize this all happened before. This is deja vu. And if we don't learn our actual history, we are going to repeat it. We are going to have everything going up in flames and nuclear events. So, what else did I want to mention? Before I get into the history, the actual history of the solar system. Now, this thing about the Judas scroll, everybody's talking about it this weekend. They found the book about Judas, who, now, there was a book about 30 years ago I read by a Greek, I think it was Kazantzakis, about the whole story. The story is that Judas wasn't really a bad guy. Judas was part of the plan to make the prophecy come true. So Jesus asked that he perform that role of betraying him so that the prophecy would come true. And according to the book I read 30 years ago, and this scroll, this caused a lot of conflict with Judas. He didn't really want to do it, but he was, yes, I have to do it, or none of this prophecy will come true. So they found the scroll was written in 300 AD, and where was it? It was found in the 70s, and they haven't done anything with it till now. So you have to ask, well, why are they just doing something with it now? I mean, it was written, and of course, like everything else, it was written hundreds of years after the fact. So All the New Testament that was written, they were all written after the fact. And all these parable stories and everything, most of them came from ancient Egypt. As we get closer to it, you'll find out where they came from. Yeah?
Wasn't that one of the premises of the Holy Blood, the Holy Grail as well, that Judas was...
Really, I don't remember that part of it, but it could have been. But there, oh, was it? Well, there was a book written even back in the 70s, I think, by a Greek writer. I think his name was Kazantzakis. Could have been called the Nazarene or something like that, but it had that story in it. It was about the conflict that Judas didn't really want to do this, but he had to for the prophecy to come true. So now, first of all, we're going to do the solar system. The solar system was quite new, 4.5 billion years ago, when Marduk, they called the planet Marduk, but it was really Nibiru. Marduk was one of these people. So when it was his turn to rule, he said, I want the planet named for me. I'm the most powerful person here. I want the planet renamed. So it became Marduk. But in the beginning, in Sumerian, it's called Nibiru, and this means the planet that crosses, the planet that crosses. And its symbol was this, because it was crossing, and every time it crossed, something new happened in the solar system. So in the beginning, there was just the sun over here, and this large planet called Tiamat. Now in the Bible, they discuss this, but they say it in another way. I've got it in here. Here it is, and I've taken it right from the book. So the prophet Isaiah said this. He recalled the primeval days when the might of the Lord, now he means this planet that's coming through, the celestial Lord, the might of the Lord carved the haughty one. This was Tiamat. This planet became our Earth. Nibiru came through. Its satellites struck part of this planet. And this planet, it formed the asteroid belt, which they called heaven. They called the asteroid belt the heaven and the earth. And then Job even says, the celestial Lord, they always say the celestial Lord, meaning the planet, also smote the assistants of the haughty one. So this planet had a lot of satellites around it, and the biggest one was what we now have as our moon. I'm just giving you this very briefly. So Nibiru came through 4.5 billion years ago, struck this planet, made the asteroid belt. The comets that still go through on these huge elongated orbits, some of them 10,000 years, came as part of that mass that was struck. The Earth was bounced over to the orbit it's in now, so it ended up being a smaller planet. And the hammered bracelet, or the asteroid belt, was here. And that was the rest of the planet that was left. So I'll just read you what it says. The prophet Isaiah recalled the primeval days when the might of the Lord carved the haughty one, made spin the watery monster. If you're interested in Sumer, the watery monster was that planet Tiamat. And the celestial Lord smote the assistants, the satellites. You've got to know what the language means. And exalted the Lord who, the hammered canopy stretched in the place of Tehom. Tiamat was Tehom in Hebrew. The hammered canopy was the asteroid belt. That's the remains of this planet became the asteroid belt. The rest of her was shunted right over here in the orbit we're in now. And it says here, the earth was suspended in the void. His powers the waters did arrest. His energy, that's all about Nibiru, his. The haughty one did cleave. So what they're saying is, it cut right into that planet, tossed it over here, and that's why the earth in Sumerian has been called the one that has been cut. And the name is Ki. Gaia, geology, geography, Ki. The solar system is not quiet. Things are happening out there. This old idea that, oh yeah, the solar system is formed, they just sit there, it's all very lovely, nothing's happening, because we're here. We don't see any of that, but if we could, we would see all kinds of things. Comets are coming and going, everything has its own orbit, and this planet that comes through has a huge elliptical orbit like this. Now the beauty of that for this planet, the one that comes through, is this. The people on this planet do not have to get in a spaceship and go long distances. This elliptical orbit takes this planet. This planet is its own rocket ship. It is. This planet, 3,600 of our years, finally, say the Earth is here. As soon as this orbit brings them close enough to Earth, all they have to do is a short hop. It's not a big long space journey. That's why they could come here. They couldn't make millions of miles of, no, their own orbit was what brought them close to the Earth at that time, every 3,600 years. And lots of things in the Bible, when they refer to the day of the Lord, and there'll be woe, and Amos talks about it, and Isaiah talks about it, they knew what they meant back then. They meant this. This is a regular occurrence. So that's what they were talking about. On the film, I can't do questions because on the film, they can't hear you. And I just stand here like I've gone off into a fugue. So we have to wait till the filming is over. But anyway, this elliptical orbit carries it right by the Earth. So the Earth and the asteroid belt in the Bible are referred to as heaven, heaven, and earth over here. And that is how the epic of creation means the creation of the earth, how the earth actually was created when this happened. And various other things have happened at other 3,600-year periods since then. So a lot of things that refer to the Lord, whenever it's the celestial Lord or the day of the Lord, you know that certain people were aware of Sumerian history and they warned everybody. It's terrible things are going to happen, we could all go. And NASA also has agreed with the ancient, one of the most famous Sumerian translators, his name was King. NASA has also agreed with them. They said the moon, now I'm quoting NASA, celestial bodies the size of large cities came crashing into the moon, a planet which was laid waste. So when this Tiamat with her moon, she had other satellites, but the moon in Sumerian was called Kingu, that was the moon. When she was shoved over into the orbit we're in now, the moon was taken along with her. But the moon at that point, it would have been a planet, but it became dead. It was so battered that it just became a dead satellite and was over here. It's over here with the Earth now. And NASA agrees, the more astronomy we find out, the more these people agree with the Sumerian history. It's all there on thousands of tablets. But 200 years ago, some organized religions decided, let's say it's all myth. Well, it's not myth. It's absolute, the history of our Earth, our planet, and you know, when it comes through again, not every time it comes through does it do something terrible, but say the seventh or after several passings, it will cause another type of disturbance, like the one Velikovsky talked about. He thought that Venus was not there at the beginning of the solar system, but it was. All that happened was, when it came through in 200 BC, which is about the time he says all this happened in his book, it disturbed something to do with the planet Venus, because the planet Venus for a while was knocked out of its orbit and was going around chaotically, and people lived in fear. They called it Lucifer, because in the daytime you could see the light from the planet Venus was up in the sky. They could see it day and night. So that was another name back then. Lucifer means light, and the Venus was called Lucifer. So now we get to this part. Once the Earth had gone into the orbit here, about 4.5 4 billion BC. The solar system was formed 500 million years before this happened to the Earth. Then the Earth cooled down and things started to evolve on the Earth. So by the time they came here, Homo erectus was already wandering around Africa. So what I'm telling you now about the solar system, our Earth became on its own in its own orbit back then, 4 billion years ago. So according to the Hindus, the day of Brahma is 4.5 billion years. Now, I don't know if they know why. They might have known way back then because they are the oldest religion. And the Hindu religion is the only one with a permanent caste system. Now, being the first religion, the permanent caste system would have been copied from the first workers. That religion came out of the tasks when the Anunnaki gave people on the earth a genetic boost. They were categorized. Certain people did all their clothing, certain people worked in the mines. Originally they all worked in the mines to get the gold for their atmosphere. It was desperate, a desperate situation. And then every time they gave someone, some people made clay, some people did building, some people did their clothing, some people cooked for them. These people that they gave the genetic boost were servants. They were basically the first slaves, but they didn't know they were. So that religion has a caste system, the same, based on your job. And whatever your ancestors' job was, whether you were a shoemaker, whether you were collected garbage, in the Hindu system today, you cannot change your caste. You've just got to get right out of the system, go somewhere else. You've got to negate everything, but that's why Hinduism was the first religion. We're talking 10,000 years ago, and it came out of this working, their worker status, and that clung to that religion through all these years. And that's where that came from. So, so now, at the end of the planet coming through, this is basically what Nibiru did the first time it came through. So this will give you some idea of what happens in solar systems. You don't see stars exploding, you don't see planets colliding, because we're so tiny here. I mean, you'd have to be out in space looking on, saying, oh yeah, everything's happening at once. There is no past, there is no future. Everything happens in the now. If you were big enough, it would constantly, everything would be in the now. Everything would be going on all the time. So this is what it did when it came through. And I've got it in short form here. It shunted, it cut into the largest planet, Tiamat. It came back on its second. Now, the first trip, it just shunted into it and cut it. The second 3,600 years, when it came back again the second time, it came back, shunted the upper half of the planet into our orbit as Earth. The remains are the asteroid belt. So that's where Tiamat was, where the asteroid belt is now. Then Tiamat's satellites are all comets, and the scientists don't know why, but they're all in reverse orbits, because that planet entered our solar system going, if we were clockwise, it was going the other way. In other words, so when it came in, it was traveling in a different direction to what the solar system travels. So when it formed, when it got the comets from the planet that it hit, the comets are all in reverse orbits. And no, the astronomers, the scientists, oh, we don't know why. All the comets are just in reverse orbits. So a satellite of Saturn was knocked out and became Pluto. Pluto was once a satellite of Saturn. Yes, it was. And they describe this, the whole Enuma Elish, it's on the net, but not one library in this country. I said to them, I want one copy. They go into all the provinces and ask. They went right the length and breadth of Canada, and I could not get a copy of the Epic of Creation, the real one, the real history. I couldn't get it in any library in this whole country, but it's on the net. So if you can get it on the net, great. So a satellite becomes of Saturn becomes Pluto, and to this day, here's another little thing that happened. The planet Uranus, it's on its side. It is not upright. It is not revolving the way it should be. It's down on its side like that, and the scientists don't know why. And they also say they know there's a large planet out there past Neptune, they know, and Saturn, and if you ask them why, they'll say because the orbits of Saturn and Neptune are disturbed. And they're disturbed to the point where we know that whatever's out there is large, because it's affecting the orbits of the outward planets right now. When you say to them, well, where is it? Well, we don't know, we can't see it. But it could be, if the orbit is elongated like this, and it's not due till 3400 AD, the last time was 200 BC, so just add that, it's always 3600 of our years. It could be way out here somewhere, and our outer planets could be here. So by the time, though, that it gets past the outer planets, trust me, everybody's going to know that it's on its way. So by 3400 AD, hopefully, if we're smart, as we think we are, we might have figured out a way to either be up somewhere or on some other, or know its exact track as it comes through, and be prepared. So now that is the true story of how the Earth came into being. Nobody's arguing that, well, yes, there's a spirit that manifests the universe, but the universe, and there's many of them, we can't encompass that in our poor little brains. Can you try to imagine nothing? Try to imagine a color you've never seen. And there must be many. I mean, how can you? We simply cannot encompass the size of even this galaxy, which they say has at least 10 million other planets like the Earth. Like the Earth. So, if you want to talk about God, then you have to talk about something much bigger than the literal translation of, and that's how our solar system did come into being. And they have all the Sumerian names for the planets. I've got them here. They're all, so they were all there, even Venus. So something happened to Venus, but it was there from the beginning. It wasn't, as Velikovsky said, oh, Venus was born out of Jupiter, out of the head, you know. No, something happened to Venus. It was there. So the thing about organized religion that really sticks in my craw is that it's about reductionism. It's all reductionism. They say, one book. All you need is one book. You read this one book, you believe this one book, you're all set. That's what organized religion is about. And you can't think like that. If you have a brain, you cannot think that way. And well, it's kind of hypocritical because each religion does have other books. Catholics have catechism, the rabbis have their own book, the Talmud, and blah, blah. They don't just go by the Bible. But it's a form of reductionism. In other words, it puts you right back in the box. You only need this one book, go by this one book. Doesn't matter whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity. This is what most of these organized religions say. All you need is that book. So if you're simple enough to believe that one book will give you everything that you need to grow in this world spiritually, and likewise, then you have to use belief. Okay? And that's what's right in the middle of that. If you're left with no evidence, this is what you have to do. If someone confines you to one book and says, this is all you're supposed to read now, everything else is work of the devil or something else, don't read it, then you're reduced to this. Now, this word belief comes from the Old English word belie. If I see someone doing something, they say don't do it, but then they do it themselves, I'm going to say to them, well, your actions belie your words. You are a hypocrite. Your actions belie. So that's where belief comes from. You have no evidence, so you're going to do this. So that has to be hammered into people. You do this, that's what you're left with. So if you want to escape taxes, of course, just call whatever it is, just call it a religion, whatever your group is, call it a religion. You'll get away with all kinds of things. So we're going now into a special effect of this reductionism and this belief. If you're going to have one book and you have to believe, no matter what it says, no matter how, airy-fairy it seems to you, it has to do with sacrifice. If you can get enough people to believe a certain thing, you can actually have them marching up to the, in Mexico and that, they had these deep wells and people's hearts were ripped out. And so you get into sacrifice. Now, where does that word come from? It comes from this word. This means blood. Sacré is blood. Sacred, something that's been sanctified by blood. Got to get to the bottom of this religion thing here, because it is an enormous control. And in war, of course, in the thousands of years ago, and now, of course, captives were sacrificed. In peace, slaves were sacrificed. There's never been a time on this planet where there was not slavery. We have debt slavery now. It does the same thing. People die from it. Anyway, we've never been without slavery. So in peace, slaves were sacrificed. Now, here's where we're getting to something very interesting. In calamities, I mean something tragic, something that nature did to a whole country, or all kinds of calamities or huge wars, kings were sacrificed. Because the idea of sacrifice is that you give the gods something that you really treasure. Can't be just anything. It's got to be something you really treasure. So in calamities, when you were involved in a belief, either a god will kill us all if we don't sacrifice a few slaves. When they raised up buildings, all these children were buried alive under the building, so nothing would ever go wrong with the building. Oh, let's give our kids. And then before the Israelites got the Moses thing happening, they were sacrificing to Moloch, just like the countries all around them. In fact, it described it, and it said the mothers were bound and gagged to stop their screaming while they were watching their children dying, burning alive, buried alive. So this was what religion, excuse me, and it's still about this. Oh, yes, it is. Those boys in Afghanistan, yes, they are, blood sacrifice. So kings were sacrificed, and kings also sacrificed their own kids, their own children. One guy sacrificed all his kids so the gods would give him a longer life. Somebody else sacrificed his kids so that he'd win a war. This is what was going on all the time. And the Phoenicians offered their fairest children to be sacrificed in a drought. If a drought happened, well, if I was a mother back then, I'd be the first one in the woods. I'd be hiding my kid. I'd be living in a cave, because they would come and get the children and kill them. So a vast number of children were sacrificed. When they were founding a city, oh, maybe hundreds, maybe more children were sacrificed. Who would want to be a mother in those days? And whether you liked it or not, yes, because why? The gods. The gods, you were told the gods demanded it. The gods demanded it, and who were you told by? Okay? The priests. The priests. The priest, I told you, was the oldest profession, not the prostitute. The priest. He invented the temple prostitute first. They wanted the temple prostitute, okay? Gets back to this again. Those dangerous women, okay? So, the children were sacrificed. I don't know which were boys and which were girls. But today on this planet, who are still being sacrificed? The children. that children in every country, I don't care what country it is, the slave trade, the porno business, the kids they use in wars, that children are still being sacrificed, not in the hundreds, thousands now. And in a famine, millions are sacrificed. So how far are we out of the trees? You have to ask yourself that. So instead of thinking about, oh, I'm going to believe that such and such, I'm going to be saved, what about everybody else? What kind of an attitude is that? I'm going to be saved, you're going to be here, we're all going up, blah, blah. Say you're driving along the highway, all of a sudden the rapture comes. Up you go in the rapture. What happens to all the other traffic on the highway? You're not in the car. They don't seem to care. Oh, whatever time it happens, I'll be going up and you'll be down there. So it is a bit silly, but it's a way of absolutely avoiding your responsibility as a human being. It's a way of avoiding that. It's a way of being fatalistic. Well, why do anything about peace on earth now? It's all going to happen. We're going to have Armageddon. It's all in the cards, so why do I have to do anything? Well, that's the way it is. It's all been decided. It's all in the old testicle. So if you keep reading that, you're going to get out of, your growth. So, well, for instance, say that, we'll say if you're a Catholic, and it doesn't matter who you are, they still do this, say that you've done a lot of nasty things in your life. There you are on your deathbed, and the priest comes in to give you extreme unction, you're lying there, and apparently all you have to do is go, "Scoozy, mille regretti," and up you go. So what is that going to do for your spiritual life? What work have you had to do? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense even for evolution. So now we get to the word massacre. Now what is this really? A massacre is a mass bloodletting. That's a massacre. Sacré, sacred, sacrosanct. It's all about blood. The gods demand oceans and oceans of blood. Before, they'll give certain people favors. Well, what is that about? If we want this group, if we're going to be happy and our building's going to be there forever and blah, blah, we'll just give the gods, whoever they are, whichever one they picked, we'll just give the gods so many children, blah, blah, and they'll die horribly. But that will mean the gods will favor us. Who is going to follow a god like that? What has that got to do with evolution? Nothing. What, you're murdering and killing and mass bloodlettings because the gods demand it? No. It was the priestly control. That was a priestly control. What, did they even see a god or know a god? Give me a break. But if you're the high priest in whatever religion, your word is the word of the gods or God. And if you can indoctrinate people from an early age, if you grow up with something, it's 100%, not even 90, but 100. You're not going to leave the religion you're indoctrinated with. They've said this, people who indoctrinate, they've said, give me a child before he's 6, and I'll have him the rest of his life. This is a very common saying in organized religion. So it comes down from the priest. The priest tells the people walk up and they're either thrown in wells, hearts torn out, still beating. Well, they thought of they couldn't even give them a peaceful death. No. Not give them some little, like hemlock for Socrates. No, it wasn't just death. It was an agonizing, horrific, lots of blood washing all over to make sure that the gods were going to be happy. And they would favor these people that organized the big mass murder. It's nothing to do with the spirit that animates this universe, nothing whatsoever. It is strictly a social control when you speak for God, per se, and you give advice, even if it's don't use birth control, but it's okay to do anything to the kid once it's born, oh no, we can't abort it, even if it's only this big and it's a thumbnail. But when it's born, we can do anything we want to that kid. What kind of hypocrisy is that? It's the worst kind, but it's all done by the priestly control. I'm doing this class because Easter's coming up, but you're not gonna leave depressed, I promise, because there is hope in here somewhere. But we are responsible for what happens. So, so what happens with this is, you are saved. First you're indoctrinated, then all this happens, and sometimes it's just in war, okay? It can be war, it can be prisons. There are dreadful places that you would never want to go. Prison, mental hospitals. Most of the people in them are not really mentally ill, but by the time they have a month in there, they are. Trust me. If they went in and they weren't, they will be after a month in there. So these are all social controls, every one of them. So when you're talking about religion, and I actually will do a paper on this, when you get into the ritual part of it, the rituals that go on and on and on, it's a form of OCD. I'm sorry. Organized religion is massive, obsessive, compulsive disorder. That is what it is. And some people, even the rituals, some people who wash all day, they have an OCD. But people who go in for this, ritual after ritual and ritual, and don't feel right unless they do it, I'm sorry, they're part of that mental problem. It actually becomes a mental illness. So your spiritual life has nothing to do with these priestly controls. A woman can't be a priest, but it's okay to have all kinds of pedophiles in there with the little choir boys. That's okay. So it's totally hypocritical. Absolutely. And as long as it is, you're going to have more and more atheists, more and more people who are just going off into New Age, this or that, getting on their own bandwagon because they can't stand it anymore. They can't stand the hypocrisy, so they're going to do something else. No, I don't want to forget anything here. Okay, now, so from here, where did I put my list? From here, we're going into the Old Testament, okay? So you'll know where it comes from and how it got there. We'll be going into that. Now, where did I put it? Oh, yeah, that's the... Now, I'm going to give you some dates here. Write them down, because when you start arguing with people who say, oh, no, the big finger came down from the sky, that's what happened. We've got to pay attention to it all, do what it says, you know. And we're still using sacrifice. We're still using that. So here's the history. Aside from other religions, the oldest religion is Hindu, and then up about from 700 BC onwards, most of the other religions got on board, like Zoroastrianism and Mithras and all that business. And then in 725 BC, and I've got the exact dates here, what happened was Israel, or Judea, what we call Judea then, was conquered by Assyria. Conquered by Assyria, and the Israelites were taken to Babylon. Okay? And in Babylon, they learned, of course, about the epic of creation. They learned the genetic things. They learned the Sumerian history when they were in Babylon. And of course, they included it in the first 5 books as Genesis, genetics, Genesis. They included that. So in 621, now this is what happened. In 725 BC, Jehovah was all but forgotten. Nobody could even remember him anymore. But there was a small group of Mosaic Moses, a small group of priests who were taken to Babylon, the Mosaic crowd, and in 621 BC, when the king died, I forget the king's name now, I didn't write it in here, the king died, and there was a 9-year-old king called Josiah, 9 years old. The Mosaic priests got control of him, and when he was 18, he said that Mosaic law was going to be the law, okay? Now, that was a great start for them. His father's dead. His father wasn't that old. They never said how his father died. Anyway, they got control of the young king, and then once he made that law in Assyria, Babylon, then in 620, they came out with, the Mosaic priests, came out with Deuteronomy. They wrote that in 620 BC. Then, around the same time, a guy named Hilkiah came running in one day, and he said, I found a book in the temple. It's written by Moses. Now, according to their history at the time, that was 800 years ago. Moses was 800 years before this, okay? Comes running in, I just found a book in the temple written by Moses. Picks it up, reads it right off. Well, try reading English 800 years ago. Pick it up. Try and read it. You won't even recognize the language. But this guy, Hilkiah, picks up the 800-year-old book by Moses, reads it right out like it was written yesterday, which it was. And so Hilkiah was the second guy, another priest. These are all priests here. You have to understand, the priestly caste was running the earth, and they still are, to a large extent. So Hilkiah finds the book by Moses. All right, after that, the last part of it, in 444 BC, after lots of changes and additions and what have you, Ezra brings the finished Pentateuch, it's called, 5 books, the Pentateuch. They add on Genesis, their condensed version of Sumerian history, very condensed, very selective. They add that in the book. Ezra then makes his own changes, does a lot of editing, and then he brings this book to Judea in 444 BC, and he says to them, now this book is divine. And from then on, it was the books of Moses. And of course, we don't know if he ever lived. There's no evidence. And that's where we get the Old Testicle. There's where it's from. That's when it started. And of course, they plagiarized the Sumerian Genesis and made it sound like God was a farmer in some little garden. And he was just like, you know, this guy walking around, which he was, because he wasn't God. He was not God. So now in the Old Testament, who is the God in the Old Testament? It's Jehovah. Now, what does Jehovah mean? Male. This is Hebrew. Hova, female. Okay? And we don't know if any of the things happened, like the wars and the massacres and all that, but like they say, you know, it's the thought that counts. Killed millions and millions. And this guy was then promoted as God with a capital G. Most of the Christians in this world, not to mention the Jews, to this day are saying this guy, this tribal warlord, and you can read about him. You can just read it for yourself. I'll take so many slaves. I'll take so much gold. You have this. I'll get my cut. War. You can have the city, but kill everybody in it. This guy is promoted now all over the world as God, the Creator, with a capital G, the guy who created the universe. And I said to this friend of mine once, who was a very Orthodox Jew, and I said to him, if this guy is God, I said, then we're doomed. He says, yes, we are. He said, and Jesus was the son of Jehovah. I said, wait. I said, if he lived, how could he have been the son of Jehovah? I said, this killer, and the New Testament is exactly the opposite. Forgive, help your neighbor, blah, 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 turn the other cheek. I said, they're completely opposite. Jehovah was, I said, he couldn't be the son of God, Jehovah, because Jehovah was not God. And he says, well, what do you think, Jehovah, who he was? I said, well, I just think he was another murdering bastard, that's all. So when he started to laugh, and he laughed like it was just the most amusing thing he'd ever heard. So now, after all this happens, he claims the book is divine. Then into the book comes Jehovah with all the battles of the warlord. And then, because the Sumerian history has been hidden, not taught, and if it's taught as myths. So the real history of our planet is taught as a myth. And the myths, this Jehovah and all the so-called wars and everything, the myths about this minor warlord have now, we're told, this is all the truth. These are all the truth. This is really God. And you better believe it, or else. Now that, when I say we have to analyze the ultimate deceit, this is the ultimate deceit on the planet today. I mean, if you were to say to most Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, I don't care who they are, and most Messianic, even Messianic Jews, but most Jews, and say, well, Jehovah, he wasn't God, you know. You know? No. That is the ultimate deceit. Now, this is what happens when you have a deceit like that. This is why people are confused, because on the one hand, they're told that God is good and all-loving and all-knowing and beneficent. On the other hand, this guy's been nothing but a killer. He has done nothing but kill through the Old Testament. That's all he does. He kills, he loots, he takes the slaves, he's in favor of slaves, number one, takes the gold, loots all the cities. This is the person, Charlie Manson on steroids, that's being promoted to the planet as the creator God. Capital G. And you wonder why the human race is so confused. And why they think, well, if God could do all this, it's okay for us to have wars. We can kill too. You can kill under special circumstances because, look, he did it. This absolves people again from evolving. Because this is the God that's being promoted. What is that doing to our evolution? We're regressing. We might have the mechanics of it, we might have the bombs, the missiles, the technology, but our ethics are back here with this guy. And with these people who used to sacrifice how many children, we want good luck, let's see how many we can kill today, God will love it. We're back to that again. People have got to realize that the spirit that animates the universe, which is beyond comprehension, when I was 12, I knew this wasn't the guy. I went to Sunday school like everybody else, Methodist, United Church, whatever. I had this Sunday school teacher, nice little brown hen of a woman, big brown eyes. I remember her now. She looked like a pigeon sitting there. And she was telling me the story of Abraham with Isaac going up the mountain because God said, come, you're going to sacrifice. I want to see how much you love me. Bring your child. We're going to sacrifice him here on the mountain. Abraham gets up there, has all the sticks for the fire to burn him or got the knife to kill him, whatever they're going to be doing, puts him on the big rock. What? Jehovah says from behind the bush, just kidding. Oh. That's God, the Creator? Come on. All you have to do is read the Old Testament to realize that is one sick puppy there, whoever he was. So I said to the Sunday school teacher, you know, wait a minute. Why would God do that? Why would God frighten that man to that extent and demand just to see if he'd do it? And her answer was, like they always are, we don't know. we can't understand the mind of God. That was her answer. I left Sunday school. I was 12, but I did have a brain. I never went back. But this is these are the stories that are given to kids. This is God. He'll do that. He'll play mind games. He'll see you go through all kinds of hell. Why? To prove that you love him. Well, come on, I'm not masochistic. I might have to say, no, I don't think I do. But what I said to her was, that is not the God that I know, and I don't think it's God. And off I went. So you might say I've been an outcast ever since. But this Jehovah, who did nothing but kill and take slaves and take gold and tell his Israelites, whatever, mercenary soldiers, you can have this city, but first everyone has to be dead. They went back to him one time and he said, did you kill the women and children? They said, no. He said, go back and kill them. This is being promoted as God the Creator. This is the biggest deceit and problem and crime against humanity. Secondly, it's the money. But this is number one. How can human beings think about spiritual life when that is the example of God? I phoned into a radio show, Michael Koren, one time on the radio show. He had a rabbi there. And he said, I want Christians to call in and talk about God and what you believe about God. So I phoned in. He was happy to get my call. I said, oh yes, I said, I do believe in God. There is a God, there is a spirit. But of course it isn't Jehovah. Silence for 10 seconds. The button was pulled, I was off. And the rabbi, of course, came on and made all these, he argued his case once I couldn't argue back. But that's what happened. Now this is problem number one. Okay, number one. This is the problem. Now we're going to get to, what's the next thing we're going to talk about here? Oh yeah, and those are the authors of the Old Testament there. And now we're going into the Christian religion. And they have nothing to do with each other. You have to remember, when the Old Testament was finished, the Council of Nicaea, they started putting inserts into the Old Testament to make it look as if the New Testament came right out of the Old Testament. It did not. Completely different philosophy. So the philosophy in the Christian religion is, in a way, it's not very good either. It's sort of, number one, it's a good social control because you're going to tell people you're going to get your reward in heaven. Okay? Reward in heaven, that's the main philosophy. And if you can have people believing they're going to get a reward in heaven, they're not going to make any rebellion here. Ideal social control. Turn the other cheek, blah, blah, blah. You'll get your reward in heaven. So don't care what you have to go through here. You could be suffering all the torments of the damned. That's okay, because if you go along with that, you suffer through that, you are going to get a reward in heaven. Now, the priests know all about that. They know you're going to get the reward. You would have to say to them, okay, well, what about all those kids you've been sacrificing through the years and all this? Did they get a reward? Did you tell them that before they went up in flames or got tied and burnt and whatever? So this is the ideal social control if you can get people to believe this. Yes, it is. And nobody has come down from heaven to tell us about this. Nobody has come back to tell us, oh, there's a lake of fire. If you don't do it, you're going to burn forever. Hell wasn't invented for hundreds of years after Jehovah, the Bible, all of this. So the first thing about Christianity that is almost as bad as the other thing is, you're going to get your reward in heaven. So it doesn't matter what happens now, you'll be okay. So that's really a dangerous, that is like, you go from the sadist, Jehovah, to the masochist. Nothing in between. Why can't we have something in between? A balance here. So I went to see Mel Gibson's film because of the big hoo-ha, and I like Mel Gibson. somebody said to me, how can you like Mel? You don't believe in any of that. And I said, I can admire his integrity and that he has the guts to be upfront about what he believes, because a lot of people won't. They'll pretend they're secular until you find out they really do have a bias. That might take a while. So the reward in heaven works as a social control. So now, we're going to start here what happened. First of all, you have the virgin of birth, okay? Then you have the star. Oh no, the star comes first. Star announcing the birth, okay? And then you have the birth. It's in a cave or a manger, okay? A cave or a manger. And then Jesus is baptized by John, it was, baptized by John. And then John is decapitated. And then the king, some king, seeks to kill the child. Okay, that's the next thing. To kill the child. Now, what's next? And then you have the slaughter of the innocents by Herod. Another slaughter. It's always of the innocents because they can't defend themselves. The slaughters of the innocents have been popular right through history. And then there's no history of Jesus between 12 and 30. Regardless of that Kimball guy, because he has no manuscripts. That's a lot of malarkey. And he walks on water and casts out demons. Casts out the demons. These are all the things that happened in those 3 years. He healed the sick. And he transfigured before his disciples, of whom there were 12. He transfigured before 12 disciples. And he had the Sermon on the Mount. I think some people call them the Beatitudes. Then he was crucified, buried in a tomb. Resurrected. I hope I'm following the story correctly here. And appeared again to Mary. Oh yes, and then we mustn't forget Lazarus. He raised Lazarus from the dead. And what else did he do? He raised Lazarus. Yes, and he threw out the money changers in the temple. Okay, and the water to wine. That comes under here, these miracles here. Water to wine. Now that is more or less the story of Jesus. Now, that's the story of Jesus. And that's the one we know. And that is the Savior that we know. And before Jesus, this exact same story was told of Horus in Egypt 8,000 years ago. Okay. Horus, the same thing, identical. And then it was the story of Osiris and Adonis, which means just Lord. Adonis. It was the story of Adonis. It was the story of Bacchus and Romulus, who supposedly founded Rome. Romulus and Apollo. Apollo, the same life story. Mithra. Mithra had the same story. Zoroaster had the same story. All thousands of years before, even Krishna. Okay. Krishna, Rama, and Buddha. The Chinese god Yu, Attis, and Quetzalcoatl, which was the feathered serpent, they called him, because he was a scientist and he could fly. Anything with feathers or wings meant they could fly, and it meant in a vehicle. So now, all these, and there is a book which you might be able to get, and it's at the Knox College here. I got mine and I copied it. And it's by Kersey Graves, K-E-R-S-E-Y, Graves, G-R-A-V-E-S, and the title is The 16 Crucified Saviors. And it's about what I'm telling you now. The 16 Crucified Saviors, and it's about exactly what I'm telling you now. Oh, the author? Kersey, it's K-E-R-S-E-Y. Graves, G-R-A-V, as in Victor, E-S. If you can't get it, I have a copy, and when we come back after Easter, we will go through 3 or 4 books that if you can't find them, I can copy them for the class at cost, and you can have them to take home. So now, the story, I'm going to explain why all these people have the same story. Now, when, in Jesus' day, when this was going on, if he lived in that area, I wonder if I can get this board down. Oh, goody. It was not an isolated place. Around this time in history, say this is the Mediterranean here, and you've got Judea somewhere around here. From here, you've got the Buddhists. This was an enormous trade route. This was not a quiet, isolated place. This was the center of an enormous trade route. People were coming from China. The Buddhists with their begging bowls were coming. Other religions were coming over here from the Mediterranean. Rome was the colonizer at the time. But you had this busy, busy trade route. So all religions were coming together at different points. There probably would have been many, many people preaching out on the streets, the fields, whatever, and these religions all met. And Christianity that started in that time, the original one that started before the first 400 years was over and Christianity had mutated into some kind of a monster, in the beginning, they took the idea straight from Egypt. In Egypt, back around 5000 BC, Egyptian people were buried in their tombs with a cross. They had the cross here. And the cross with the loop on the end meant this is eternity. That was the Ankh. And the Egyptian idea, back to Horus here, who was Osiris's son, the whole idea was that Christ was not a man to the Egyptians. Their idea was Christ is in man. Christ, the Christos, the divine spark, is in every one of us here. All we have to do is realize it and evolve that spark. So the Egyptians, their idea of the Christos was, it was not a person. Everybody had the ability to be a Christos, have the divine spark in them. But when this came up to this time, when this was happening again around Judea, whether Christ lived or not, as she says, the message is important. It started out like that, but in the first 400 years of Christianity, they burnt thousands of books. They burnt the library at Alexandria. They punished pagans. They killed them. They just destroyed everything that was pagan because they did not want the power of the church that was being set up, did not want the idea that the Christos is in you. And it's carried through all the generations. All these people had the same story because the story is yours. They meant you will have your own birth. You will go through your own Gethsemane. And I know people who are going through it now. And you will find your own Christos in that. You will find that divine spark, because what you're put here, you're evolving, and all the difficulties, you're going to find that spark, and that's going to come out of the whole Christ thing, the Gethsemane. The Judas being the betrayer, he doesn't want to be, he says, but it has to come true, the prophecy. It's really about you, the human race, has the ability, the human race has a divine spark. Whether we were given a genetic boost by another crowd doesn't even matter. The divine spark is there. And so all good people, no matter what religions they're in, we can't all be Mother Teresa, but the religion you're in doesn't matter. What matters is, are you working on your divine spark? But if you're told you don't have to do anything except believe that this guy, no. So what they did was, another big crime against humanity, they took the idea of Christ in man. Christ means the Christos, the anointed one, the divine, the Christ in man, and they took that over 400 years of wiping all the pagan truths out. They changed it to Christ as a man. And what did they leave us with then? What are we left with then? What are we?
Nothing.
Miserable pieces of primordial slime, and all we have to do is believe, and we will be saved. But what are we being saved from? If you say to them, what is it I'm being saved from? Tell me. All you're being saved from doing is your own spiritual work. That's all. So that's why the Buddhists don't even talk about God. Confucianism, they don't discuss God. They discuss the ethics of human behavior. That's what they both discuss. That's why when they ask the Buddha, are you a god? No, I'm not a god. Well, are you a saint? No, I'm not a saint. As I said, they said to him, well, what?
Of how great our African ancestors were. It's the one that boggles everyone's minds. The mystery of the pyramids. The mystery of the pyramids. I think it's important that if we want to deal with Kemet, if we would have to know the secrets of Kemet, right? We would have to know the things that are mysteries of the mind to the lay person, right? And one of them would be how the pyramids got there. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Share to your Facebook feeds, family, friends, so on and so forth. This is a powerful lesson. I'm going to go ahead and put this on Facebook now.